Welcome to Tentative Title with Tim. This is a podcast about creativity, about process, about filmmaking, and about screenwriting. Welcome everybody back to the podcast. Once again, I hope everybody out there is doing well. And so today's topic, I wanted to talk about the fact that we have ingredients ready to go for whatever it is we want to create. And I'm pushing back against the idea, especially when it comes to writing, that we're confronted with a blank page, because I don't think we are. The reason why I say that is because we already have a bunch of ingredients that are there to help us start the process of writing our story. And we also have life experience. We also have all kinds of things that we can pull from, and all we have to do is just put all of that onto the page. So this idea that we're confronted with this blank page, like it's this endless void that we're not able to conquer, is just, it doesn't make sense to me. And, the reason why I say that is because, NaNoWriMo happened throughout November, and at the beginning of the month, I didn't have a single story in mind. There was nothing. I was sitting at the computer on the morning of November 1st, and I was like, all right, I said, I announced what I was going to write, and okay, let's start this process. And I had no idea what the story was. I had no idea about who my protagonist was. I didn't know what story I wanted to tell. I knew nothing. And so I had literally a blank page, both in terms of just having a blank page, as well as just not having a single idea about what it was I was going to write. But that wasn't true, because of the fact that I just sat down and I was like, all right, what interests me? Oh, mystery interests me. Okay, let's start with a mystery. Let's start writing about a vision that that came to mind, actually based off of a title that I'd picked. All of this branched out from a title that I just, I have a list of titles that I have in a document, and I was just kind of scrolling through, and I was like, all right, let's go with this one. And that set the tone of what it is I was going to write. It also set the aim of my story. I was like, if I can make sure that everything that I write, it writes towards relating to this title, then I'm I have a focus. I have a roadmap. If I can get to this one moment that is not clearly defined in my mind quite yet, but somehow relates to the title, relates to the final frame, you could say, of what the story is, then I'm in a good place to kind of not go off the rails and not write things that don't really make sense to the story. And so from there, I started to just craft this idea of this mystery, and I was like, okay, that's really exciting. Okay, now where do I go from this? Okay, well, there needs to be somebody who is trying to investigate what happened. And I was like, okay, so it's a mystery, kind of like a detective story. All right. And this was all happening within the first couple minutes of the morning of November 1st, where I was writing this, this novel that just had no form. It had no idea, had nothing. And yet it started to just come out of me because it was from an interest that I have within myself. I grew up loving the mystery stories. I know in the past episodes I've talked about like loving action movies and loving action adventure and loving Star Wars and like Steven Spielberg movies, and like I love those too, but I also really love the idea of the mystery of how a story is able to reveal information. Like, I've always found that very fascinating. I find court cases very fascinating, especially criminal ones, because I'm like, here's the story that everybody knows, and then through the process of a court case, you start to get more and more information about what actually happened, and it's like it sucks for the people involved in that process because nobody should be in that, like that's not fun. But in terms of telling a story and using that method of, what does the audience know at a certain point, and what can you withhold, and how can you reveal information? And so as I was writing during this month, during NaNoWriMo, every day I was, I didn't know where the story was going, but I had a certain point in the distance of like where I wanted to end up. And so I was just learning things every day about my characters. I was learning about like these revelations, like there were certain secrets that the characters had that I had not thought about. And all of a sudden within a scene, I realized, oh no, this character is hiding something very like they're hiding something, and okay, this scene can be about them either like finally telling the other person like what's happening, or it can be about them trying to hide it even more, and just kind of like the way in which I could craft the scenes between characters and what they knew and what they didn't know. And that was all coming off of the top of my head because of the fact that I've seen so many mysteries. I've written some books that have like mystery, and I've written some scripts that have some mystery in them, and that's a genre that I really appreciate. I really love, because of the fact that you don't know where it's going to end up. Like you just don't know. You're confronted with the situation at the beginning as an audience, and you're like, well, I think I know what's going on, but then by the end of the book or the movie or the series, you see everything kind of comes together, and you realize like everything that you saw at the beginning, you realize what it was all about. And I love those kinds of stories because, like I said, you don't know where it's going to end up. It's not formulaic, but it is formulaic because there's a process. There's certain things that have to happen in a mystery in order to keep the audience's attention. You have to keep like doling out information so that the audience will want to keep asking questions, will want to try to form some kind of conclusion. And that's, to me, that's really fun. That throughout the entire piece, whatever it is, like you're playing with the audience. You're giving them things that that they can kind of like think over and try to come up with conclusions, and then knowing that they might think that so and so did the crime, that you can somehow flip it on its head and say, well, actually there was this other character that was there that night or whatever. There's so many different things that you can do, and those are the ingredients that you can use for a mystery. And that's what I love to use. And kind of, I should have mentioned this at the beginning, but I mean, in the United States we had Thanksgiving, and so what does everybody do at Thanksgiving? You're cooking. You got all these. You're not creating a turkey out of thin air. You're not creating stuffing out of thin air. You got spices. You got all the material, like all the food that you need, that you kind of put together in a recipe in order to make the Thanksgiving meal, and that applies so much to the creative. The creative tools, the creative ingredients that we have, that you don't approach the page blankly. Like there are tons of ways in which you can inspire yourself. You can find things that you love, and you take those elements, and not that you necessarily copy them, because that's not the point. The point is to take what interests you, because if you take what interests you, you're going to be interested in the story that you're telling. And then you take those elements and you bring them together and you mix them together and you create something brand new. I mean, think of all of the the movies that you love that take genre and they mix genres. They pull from different influences and they make something completely new, or it seems to be something completely new, but it's not actually. They're just taking the ingredients that already existed and then they change something about it, or they found a way to come at it in a different light, but it's still all the same ingredients. Like nothing has really changed in terms of the storytelling, but they're just there. They're taking what already exists and they're saying, okay, well, this is the way that somebody usually puts this together. Well, let's try taking the same elements and maybe mixing it with elements of another genre, and okay, let's put that together. I remember watching The Matrix back in '99 in the theater, and I remember just watching this and being amazed by how many different genres it mixed together. Like there were so many different kinds of ways that they were able to incorporate, action, martial arts, science fiction. All of these things were kind of meshed together, and at the time, it didn't feel like it was like forced or like they were trying to just put it in just because. And like even if they did put it in just because, it worked so much to tell the story. It elevated the story so much more and just made it so much cooler. And so I always remembered like sitting in the theater and just like watching the film and being not necessarily like being reminded, but like seeing certain scenes, and I'm like, oh, that's like a Western. Oh wait, oh that's a martial arts movie. Oh, that's an action movie. Oh, that's science fiction. And it was just the way that they blended it all together. I was like, this is like a pretty amazing film. I mean, not just in terms of like the mind-blowing, plot of like, of being in the Matrix, but it was just like, wow, they did a really great job of mixing genre. And I walked out of the movie theater and I was like, I want to do something like that. I want to be able to to mix genres in that way, to take little bits and pieces and to put it together in an interesting way. And that kind of started that was before I even knew I wanted to be a filmmaker. That was like, I just was so excited about that movie that it built on like what I loved about movies in the first place. And so now like I still think about the parts of that movie that I'm like, yeah, that was that I really appreciate how they were able to fit in those genres. But we can take lessons from that the ingredients already exist. There's tons of resources online. We have every movie under the sun online that you can access. I mean, granted, you might have to get a subscription somewhere, but still, you can go to the library and find a lot of movies that you can't find online. So like, there's like no excuses in terms of like finding, finding things that you can kind of like, I guess, digest and find the stories that you love. And so when you're confronted with that blank page, you're like, oh, I know what I want to write because I really love this genre and I really love these kinds of stories. And so like, don't be afraid to lean into that. Even like, every story has been done before. And so all we're really doing is just taking ingredients that exist and we're just mixing them together in different ways. And don't be afraid to take those things that are familiar and fit them into your story. Because one, if you're approaching a story from your perspective, that is going to be somewhat different. And you can find, if there's a certain the type of story that you love, that you can look at it and say, well, they usually do this story with these kinds of characters. What would happen if I, let's say, like, some mysteries, like, okay, we usually deal with like rich people in these kinds of like, mysteries. Okay, well, what happens if we take that mystery story and we put it down in like the street, and how would that like look, and how would things play out there, and just finding ways in which to like to make it different, while also just taking the beats of those kinds of stories and using them to your advantage. And I have to say, like, I was able to finish the rough draft of my novel in 25 days, and I don't know how I did it, but I mean, the only thing I can really say is that I was focusing on like what story am I telling, and like focusing on the title of like what it was I was writing, and that helped me kind of like light the way to getting to a conclusion. I could already see in my mind that like once I had a title, and once I was like, oh, well, this is a mystery, then I was like, okay, I know how mysteries work. Okay, so I need to have a character who's investigating. Okay, now I need to have like twists and turns. I need to have them go down roads that and kind of like have things stopping them from getting answers. I'm like, okay, I got that. There were so many different elements that were already built into the story that I was like, okay, well, I need to have those in there, because that's what makes this story interesting. That's what I've seen in other mysteries, and that's just how this genre works. And so it was so much fun to write, because like even when I felt like I didn't know where to go with the story, I always found a way. I always was thinking in terms of like, well, what should happen? Like at this point, the character has done this. Okay, well then, I need to throw more conflict. I need to throw more barriers in front of this character, so that they are either discouraged or they're kind of stopped from getting the answer. And that was everything that I was doing with this character. I was like, okay, how can I stop them from getting their answer? Every step of the way I was like, how can I stop them from getting the answer? How can I stop them from getting the answer? And I was like, but I also have to give them light at the end of the tunnel, where they do get some answers, and they do feel like they're breaking through and finding a way to find the answer to the mystery. And then even that doesn't, like, they still find roadblocks there. And it was just so much fun. I was so energized to jump into it. And at the end of it, I was like, yeah, the ingredients were there. Like, I was not confronting a blank page. I was what I was confronting was like just myself, like not thinking that I could do it, or not thinking that I had a good enough story or whatever. And it's like, no, it's not about that. It was about what interests me, and write the damn thing. Just write it, write the rough draft, and get through the story, because, like, I forget whose quote it was, but they were like, the rough draft is basically telling yourself the story. Like, you just got to get through it. You got to tell yourself what the story is. And then I can deal with all the details, all the editing, all the, like, trying to make it more cohesive after the fact. And, that's the reason why I do NaNoWriMo in the first place, is that it forces me to write. It forces me to like have a deadline. It forces me to, create something out of nothing. And, a lot of times we don't have those kind of challenges unless somebody's paying us to write something and they give us a deadline. Obviously it's like, okay, well, you got to make it out of whole cloth, or maybe they have a story and some characters that they want you to work with. But if you're on your own, if you're kind of like doing these self-imposed like kind of deadlines, it can be pretty tough to enforce them, because you can always give yourself an out. You can always find a way not to do it. And some of it just has to do with thinking that we're not worthy to to actually do the work, to actually make something interesting. And I want to say, throw that out the table, throw that out the window, not off the table. But that, I want to tell you that you can do it if you just get out of your head, if you get out of your way and say, you know what? This story that I'm writing may not see the light of day, but I can at least write something that I can find nuggets in, some gold nuggets that can lead to an even better story. Or maybe you write a story and you're like, I got through the entire story, and now when I'm rereading it, I'm like, it's still pretty good, but it needs more work, which most likely it will. And like, that's great too, because you wrote it, you accomplished something that most people don't. Like, it's crazy to think, but a lot of people don't actually reach the end of whatever it is they're writing, or they start writing and they get discouraged, or they never start at all because they get in their head and they get afraid that people are going to judge them for what they're writing. And it's like, well, I mean, you're never going to accomplish anything if you don't try. And people who are going to criticize you are the ones who are afraid to try. So, you already have the upper hand in terms of like just accomplishing something in the first place, because most people are too afraid to even attempt what you're trying to do. And if you keep that in mind, then you can approach the blank page and say, yeah, I know the things that I love. And I'm going to write about it in the best way I can at this moment. And then it's going to be a process where I'm going to work through it and make it better and better as I go through drafts. And before I know it, I'll either have a completed script that can go into production, or I'll have, a short story or a novel or a comic book. You'll have something to show for it as long as you keep going, as long as you don't look at that blank page and throw up your hands and say, oh, well, there's nothing I can do. It's a blank page. Like there's nothing there that I can do with a blank page. And it's like, no, there is something you can do. You can write what interests you. And to be fair, it takes a long time to figure that out. It takes a long time to accept that maybe the thing that you really love the most is something that you should be writing, because most likely you're reading something or watching something that, like, the people who made it are craftsmen. They know how to to write a story really well. And it can kind of be intimidating that it's like, well, if they wrote something so great, like, what are the odds that I'm gonna be able to do the same thing? And you still can. Like, it just takes practice, lots and lots of practice, lots and lots of failure. Like, I wish we talked about, like, the fact that we can fail but not feel bad about it. Like, really, don't feel bad about your failure on the page. Do not feel bad, because that is going to get you to the next level. That's going to get you to, like, look at your work and say, okay, what about this is bad? And just look at it from a non-emotional, like, standpoint, and just say, okay, why doesn't this work? And then address it and say, okay, well, on the next draft, I can fix that. Or, if you're going through, like, phases of just like, okay, when I go through the revision on this, when I go through this pass, I'm only going to fix, maybe, like character stuff. And then on the next pass, I'm going to fix plot stuff. And on the next pass, I'm going to do grammar. And on the next pass, I'm going to do spelling. Like, you can do it in phases. It doesn't have to be, like, all at once. And if you keep working at it, you'll have something. You're like, who knows? We may be reading your novel or watching your movie, on the screen, because you put in so much work to make it possible. And a lot of people aren't willing to do that. And like, perseverance is the name of the game. So I know I'm kind of going on a bit of a tangent, but, like, the blank page, I don't think it exists. I really don't. I think that we have enough stories within us. We have enough interests. We have enough of life experience and things that interest us, that like if we just step back and start writing, that it's just going to flow out of us naturally. And we don't have to get all worked up about it. We don't have to get stressed out about it. It's there within us. We just have to like let that story come out. Let those characters come out. And then we can fix whatever problems after we've done the purging of the story, of the thing that really interests us, and taking those ingredients and just like meshing them together in the most crude way that we can, and then kind of smoothing it out later. So, all right, guys, thank you so much for listening, and I hope I brought some ideas, some thoughts, maybe a perspective that you haven't heard before. I know, especially in like the writer communities and stuff like that, there's always this anxiety about writing, and it's like there shouldn't be. There just shouldn't be any anxiety about writing. It's like, yes, it's hard. Yes, we want it to be better. But it's like that shouldn't be the thing. It shouldn't stop us from just trying and trying and trying again. And I don't want you to stop trying and trying again. So, all right, guys, I'll talk to you on the next one. If you'd like to connect with me, there is an email for the podcast. It's tentative.title.with.tim.podcast @gmail.com. There's also a Twitter account. The handle is @title_Tim. There's also a Facebook page where you can post questions, or you can connect with me there. Thank you guys for listening. I'll talk to you on the next one.